for Disney Cruise Line and international programs. I was then promoted to a coordinator. As you can likely infer, the world around March decided it just had no need for global cruise line staffing anymore. So I was on the hunt for a new role, and that's where I found my current opportunity at KPMG. I'm with KPMG Spark, which is a really, really exciting arm of the company. It's a startup that KPMG bought up 2 years ago, before my time. But it's a business to business kind of software as a service company where, for example, if you started a small business so you can sell ice cream, you probably don't know anything about accounting. So we will give you a dedicated KPMG bookkeeper, and they'll do your bookkeeping and your tax prep and all those things. So a really exciting art of the company to be around, particularly right now, as every small business owner in America is thinking about PPP loans and getting their books in check. All that to say that I've held let's see, sorry, I'm having trouble. There we go. So I've held a variety of different titles. I've been copywriting intern, I've been social media manager, I've been communications coordinator, and social has always been part of the job. I've always had to touch it in some regard, even when I was a strategy and planning associate and I was working more on the account side. I did a lot of work with social, even in that role. Entering marketing in the year 2021 and saying, I probably won't touch socials, like being in the Mad Men era and thinking like, oh, I won't touch TV. It's too new, it's too flashy. It's going to be a reality of the job, whatever job that you take. So I want to dive into some different things that I've learned in my career, just some big takeaways, especially as y'all are students and you're looking at either pursuing social media marketing as a career or thinking about how it's going to have to play into your current roles. Number one thing I want to talk about is trends and identifying trends. And trends is probably the thing that you think of when you think about the average social media manager. And chances are, if you're not that familiar with social media marketing, you're probably thinking about that person who has like 15,000 followers and they're a micro influencer and they're always you need to get that out of your head as soon as possible. I am not a trendy person. I had to switch to a middle part so that the younger Gen Zs as an elder Gen Z don't think I'm old. Like I do the Washington Post crossword puzzle when I come home after night out. I am not a trendy person. Trends is not how we think about it in the very, very popular sense of what people are wearing. And sometimes it might be if you're doing social for a paper magazine or some fashion brand, it entirely could be. But particularly with the organizations that I have worked with, these big old behemoth organizations like Disney and KPMG, trends are identifying what's going on in the world and identifying specifically what within that matters for your organization. So talking more about identifying trends. Trends is really what's going on in your consumers' lives. For example, my life, I sit here, I work from home and I sell software. My life is going to be entirely different from someone who's a nurse right now. And so I'm going to want to see entirely different things when I log on. It all depends on what your target demographic and your consumer is happening in their lives specifically, as well as what's going on in their feeds. If they're part of a certain demographic, they likely also follow other brands maybe within your space. What is your social content sandwiched in between when they're scrolling through, which is now it's time to think about memes and trends. Thinking about what's going on in your industry, especially as I'm in accounting and tax services, we're up against titans of the industry like QuickBooks as a relatively new product. QuickBooks and ourselves and every other different accounting firm are always talking about tax right now. Tax is a big topic. Tax dates for different organizations. PPP loans are a big trend in the industry. Also thinking about the world at large, things that are going on globally, global politics, global events. And this in itself can be a whole field. You can do trend identification. And there are a lot of people that get paid a lot of money to figure that out. If that's something that really interests you, that's something you can completely do. But chances are for most organizations, and I'm talking about the average company in America that has a social media person, it's going to be done by you. The budget is likely not for the average organization in America that needs social media, probably not big enough to be paying some massive trend consultancy. So that puts the onus on you to know what's going on out there. And it can be very apparent when you don't know what's going on out there. So case in point was this poor soul that made this meme for Amazon Pay. I'm sure y'all are also on social media. I saw all the posts that were like, this is a respawn point. Bernie is not photoshopped into this. But Bernie was the man of the week of inauguration week with his fun little mittens. And so whatever content creator at Amazon Pay and this is not necessarily a bad meme. It comes across how to register for Amazon Pay. It's that easy. You just sit like Bernie and you have your hands in front of you. Great idea. But the subject of the meme is in a constant Twitter feud with the CEO of Amazon. And now you have the wrath of the entire Democratic Party turning your comments section into a dumpster fire. It's entirely possible that whoever created this content was very conservative. Maybe they don't like Bernie at all. Maybe they did not create this and push this because they're a big Bernie fan, like you would think. Maybe they're entirely conservative. And social media creates, as we all know, both anecdotally, and we've at this point had studies to prove that it puts us in echo chambers of trends and political thought points, and the list goes on, but it puts you in echo chambers of people like you. And if that person perhaps was very conservative and doesn't necessarily know that Bernie's Twitter team they must have thousands of Jeff Bezos tweets on retainer, like they just keep coming. The onus was on that person to get out of their echo chamber and say, like, this is maybe a meme that we should pass on. Like, maybe this is going to have some bad repercussions for us. Speaking more broadly about trends and audience resources, I wanted to give some specifics if you're interested in this, or maybe you're doing a social media internship or you're running your own social media brand. I wanted to speak really high level about some trend and audience resources. So audience is a consumer segmentation software, and it's from pretty big budgets. Granted, I was on a smaller team at Disney and I'm on a smaller team at KPMG. I have still not been at an organization that uses software, but I'm going to assume that the Disney marketing strategy team, which is a much bigger team and deals a lot more with consumer demographics, they're working with this. So if you have your eyes set on big organizations that are working with big budgets, you might want to look into audience. But basically they take your audience, your social media followers, what have you, and they will segment it broadly, but into really personal topics. So like, is this person a film buff? What kind of food do they like? Do they like certain sports? And you'll be able to see, I'm using the examples of whatever that year's Oscar frontrunner is. So audience answers the question of, will my audience get this meme based off of this year's Oscar frontrunner? Are enough of them film buffs that this is going to work? Or are they all like 11 and they could not care less and this is going to tank? Sparks and Honey I'm using this as really an example of the kind of cultural consulting firms that are out there in the world, but it's a really strong example. They identify overarching cultural trends. They have really great regular cultural briefings that they air live on LinkedIn. And they get into the nitty gritty of the sociology of why people are feeling the way that they do right now about certain things. One of the best talks I heard at Disney was the head of HR for the company, like the person that was next in line to Bob Iger at the time. It's Bob Chapek now. But she contracted the CEO of Sparks and Honey to come in and give us cultural trends around HR and hiring and employment that are going to put us in the right framework to understand what the average applicant is experiencing when they hire or when they apply to a role at Disney. It was a fascinating talk. They're brilliant people. Another example is I went to a conference and a cultural strategist from Sparks and Honey was speaking, and the team from Men in Black, like whatever studio put on Men in Black, and I'm not talking Will Smith, I'm talking like Tessa Thompson, Chris Hemsworth, like this was recent. But whatever studio was behind that went to Sparks and Honey and said, we need to know how the populace feels about aliens so we know what framework to write this movie in. Really fascinating information coming out of Sparks and Honey. Bread and butter of basically accessible to any organization is social media listening tools. I would name specifics, but more and more often they're integrated into management platforms like Hootsuite, Sprout, etc. That's more of what are people saying about this year's Oscar frontrunner. You can track what people are saying about your organization, track what they're saying about a certain hashtag. That's going to be the most readily accessible resource across any organization. So basically, in short, when it comes to reading trends, read the room. And sometimes you need to like play escape room and be picking up things and looking under chairs, but you need to read the room. That's really all this is, knowing what's happening in the room around you, also the adjacent rooms, but reading the room to understand the context of what you're posting in, and also to see what people are saying and talking about that's going to be best leveraged for your brand. Also want to talk about instant feedback. So social media is a very unique field in which I post something and people can say whatever they want about it. And I know immediately. This is not like if you're an art director or you're a marketing strategist and you make a billboard, you're not going to hear people drive by and say, that's an ugly billboard. You may never know. That's not a luxury that your ego has in social media. One thing that I learned, particularly in my role at Disney, but someone will always be mad. There will always be a wayward person that's going to say something. And it makes sense because at the end of the day, social media incentivizes getting into fights with random people on Facebook because every notification you get sends you dopamine. So, yeah, like it might not be fun to fight someone on Facebook, but your brain is still getting the dopamine hit that comes with any notification. So I understand where this comes from, but someone will always be mad. I would post a very nice, fluffy picture of Mickey next to a ship, a joy in a photo. And there would be some wayward consumer who might come in and be like, I had a really awful experience on board. At the end of the day, that has nothing to do with Mickey next to a ship. It really doesn't. Um, but then again, sometimes they should be. We are constantly blurring the line between social media and crisis communication. That's because we have trained the general public to go to social media when something goes wrong. We have constantly available 24-hour, 24/7 available DMs saying, like, I have a problem with my product. And someone at 2 a.m. will say, oh, I'm so sorry. But the line is increasingly being blurred. So basically, when you're dealing with that kind of instant feedback, and especially when it comes from a negative perspective, the question is that you have to ask yourself and your team has to ask themselves collectively is, what are their comments reflecting? I remember I did a pre-college summer program at a university in Tennessee, and we spoke to a church pastor because we were just getting a holistic view of communications. And at the end of the day, if you're a church pastor, you're communicating as well. And he gave a really, really interesting point that a lot of his job is trying to be a spiritual guide for his congregation is deciphering what really their criticism means. He said one day he got up and he started talking about how much he loved last night's episode of Game of Thrones, and it was Family Sunday service. And maybe touting Game of Thrones in a religious space in front of children, given the content nature of Game of Thrones, maybe was not the best call. And so he got some disgruntled parents. He said, all right, that's on me. But sometimes he'll take bold stances and he'll get people saying, like, we're losing our church. This isn't what I thought it was. You then have to think at that commentary, is this a valid commentary on what I'm delivering, the communication I'm delivering, or is this reflective of their fears of, I really feel like I belong here, am I not going to belong here anymore? So that's something, and especially if you're getting a lot of negative feedback, then you can start to say, okay, let's really think about this critically. What does this reflect in our content? How can we fix it? This is also something, if you're on a dedicated social media team, negative feedback is very scary to anyone. It's scary to me as I work in social media, but it's particularly scary if you don't work in social media because you just see people hating your company and it's horrifying. So if you're getting negative feedback and someone higher up that maybe is in a holistic marketing role or not in a marketing touching role at all, is like, we have to delete this. You need to make sure that your team has a crisis communications plan in place, a community management plan in place, but also that you're all on the same page about, okay, what does this negative feedback mean? So you can either stand up for your content and say, no, this is reflective of this singular commenter. It really did perform with our target demographic very well, or take it back to the drawing board and say what went wrong here. So next I want to talk about social in the world. Social, I put it at the bottom, Facebook is a person too, legally, it's a corporation. Facebook has feelings. But I remember back from my time at the Golf Channel, I don't know if y'all remember reading this or seeing this, but this came out in March 2018. I remember I read the article when I was sitting at the Golf Channel, but it was this very, very lengthy expose from Wired about the inner workings of Facebook security. And this was coming off of in 2016 to 2018, where Facebook was getting simultaneous heat from conservatives saying, you're silencing our voices on this platform, and liberals saying, you're destroying democracy, you've allowed foreign agents to come in, and that's why we lost this election. So they were getting heat from both sides, especially, and now we're seeing the ramifications of that in public policy debates. I've seen a lot of headlines lately about what are we going to do about big tech? Are they going to be split up? So that bad PR moment, them having a really, really bad moment post-election that's continued now through this election, turned into a lot of things. It wasn't just Facebook's problem. The actions that Facebook took from this impacted my job a lot as someone that works in social media. So Facebook, in an effort to seem like less of a vessel of both foreign agents that are buying up media space, or putting out fake content and fake news, but also making it seem like we welcome the voices of the people that you care about, started to really prioritize content from friends, not pages. So we saw, and you likely saw in your own feeds, you may not have noticed it, but you get a lot more content from your friends and the people that you know, as opposed to the pages that you follow now. It also had a spotlight on Facebook groups to try and say, this, look, people are real on this platform. People, this is a human connection tool. This is not an election rigging machine that you say that we want, that we created, that people meet each other on this platform. I think Facebook groups had a Super Bowl ad last year, if I'm remembering correctly. It became a really, really hot topic within the organization of Facebook, and they pushed groups a lot. And then coming off of all that, we saw the relative death of organic reach, which has bled into Instagram as well, because Instagram is a Facebook property, it's a Facebook acquisition. But I deal with a lot of particularly people who maybe aren't touching social media every day in their jobs, but they remember what social media was like in like 2008 to 2015. There was a time that you could just pick the right hashtags and you could have explosive growth if you really strategize your content well and you really put out the right content. But particularly on Facebook, organic reach is just not there anymore because Facebook got burned by a lot of pages getting a lot of reach and they were spreading incorrect information. Therefore, now if you're a new product and you don't have an existing large client base or large audience, you're probably going to be pouring more and more money than ever into ad spend because you have to rely on ads to get your name out there. Organic reach is just not enough anymore. So the takeaway from all of that being, social is a hot topic in public policy. It has been for a little bit, and it's only going to get hotter. There are particular debates going on right now about the state of big tech, if it's going to be broken up, what public policy is going to be taken against it, or if there's any going to be taken at all, which is both to say you have to be aware of current events, particularly political current events, if you're going to be working in social media marketing. But also you have to understand the ramifications of those public policy decisions, and even where you have to see any substantial public policy for or against Facebook, even just the threat of public policy, how it impacts how these platforms treat both advertisers and users. So now I want to talk about finding your place in social media. And this isn't necessarily like how to become a social media manager. I really want to talk about the different things you can do in social media, and whether or not it's your whole job or as part of your job. But social is a microcosm of the marketing and advertising industry. If you think about, and I'm going to go a little bit towards the advertising agency side, as opposed to like a marketing firm. But if you think about advertising agency or advertising teams, they're going to have people working in creative, you're going to have people working in accounts, you're going to have people working in strategy. Those are usually the big areas of that equation. All of those roles exist in social media. A lot of times it might get pigeonholed into creative, or if it's paid social, it might get pigeonholed into strategy. But really, truly, at some organization, all of those roles that exist for holistic marketing and advertising exist exclusively for social. So you can work for a social agency and do accounts and just be working with social. You can work in engagement, which are can be a lot of community management, working with people who are actually responding to and using to your product. You can work in strategy, you can work in creative, actually taking the pictures or the videos or writing the captions. You can work in data, you can work in search engine optimization, you can work in paid social, which is the closest thing to media buying that exists in the social media space. But all of those different roles and more, I'm just scratching the surface, that you can find in a traditional marketing agency, ad agency marketing firm exist in the microcosm of the social media ecosystem. And I also want to talk about social teams are everywhere. When everyone's on social, as every company is nowadays, every company therefore has someone doing their social, and there's a lot of work to be had, and there's lots of jobs to be had. We particularly saw, granted, the job market was tough for everyone in March through now. But there were a lot of companies that were hiring for community managers and people to respond to people, because now everyone's at home saying, hey, I can't go into the store. How does this work? There's a lot of work to be done. It's a growing field. And you can work in a traditional ad agency. Any traditional ad agency that survived to 2021 works in social. There are those opportunities there. There's social first or social only agencies. I think Social 360, I think is what it's called, is in Miami. They do great social work with national scale clientele. You could also do in-house, which, speaking to the American Marketing Association and not the Ad PR Club, is where many of you might be interested in going. But these teams all do social, but they all do it very, very differently. So you might think about, when you work in social media, there are some great brands, like I'm thinking about Wendy's or Moon Pie, that get to say a lot of really fun things. And their clients really just trust them. And usually that's going to be given to an agency. I know Tom Bruss in Knoxville, Tennessee does Moon Pie. But it's usually going to be an agency, and they're going to have trust from their client to just have really fun, creative ideas and run with them. But in my experience, having worked with Disney, having worked with American Airlines, having worked with KPMG, some, again, big behemoths that are really, really protective of their brand, as they should be. The brand's lasted them for 50 to 100 years, depending on whatever brand they just named. They think about it very, very differently. It takes a lot of stages of approvals, and this is, I'll make a point, I'll say Universal. I remember I was at the most recent advertising awards show, the Addies in Orlando. And I was speaking with some people that did social with Universal. We were talking about, like, yeah, it's because we're in such a large organization. I was at Disney at the time. There's just so many more approvals that you have to go through to get something out there, because there's so much more protection over the brand. I mean, they're already bringing that in-house. They're not trusting another agency. They really want to have full dominion over what goes out there. Which, again, I do not fault them for at all. But it does mean that it's a little bit different from other social roles that might be able to capitalize on hashtags and trends. I know from my role at KPMG, if I said, I want to do a Bernie meme, I want to do a Bernie Mittens meme, it would have had to go through me, because Bernie's a political figure. It would have then probably had to go to the national team for approval, probably would have had to go through quality assurance, and then it would have been 2 weeks from now, and I would have been laughed off of social media because it would have been February and I'm still talking about Bernie and his mittens. But the power that comes with being in an in-house team, an in-house role, there's a lot more stability. You get to talk with different teams across the entire organization. You get to work on a lot more cross-functional projects, because you're not as pigeonholed into social media as you might be at a social agency or as an ad agency. So if you're looking to go into social media, you need to figure out what you really, really like about working in social media, and then you need to follow that, not necessarily the company. You might have a dream of working for Disney, but you want to hop on trends really, really quickly. Certain teams at Disney might not be great for that because of just the amount of approvals that things have to go through. You might be perfectly content, or you might end up thinking, like, okay, I'll go to an ad agency because this is what makes sense. I'll do social media for a variety of different clients. But then you find that you miss the feeling of belonging to one certain organization for that company pride or what have you. But yeah, figure out what you like about social media. There are a million different facets to social media. Like I've said, I am not in social media because I'm a particularly trendy person. I'm in social media because I think it's a really, really smart way to market in 2021. And so there are places that are just not great teams for me. And I feel like my Disney team and my KPMG team have where I've found my strength. But yeah, I know, my apologies to the organizers because I'm coming in very short. Sorry to like throw a wrench in your programming plans. But I definitely want to have ample time for conversation. I want to have ample time for questions. Before we get into any questions, please find me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect. Please write me a note so I know where you're coming from. But I would love to connect on LinkedIn. There's my email address. You can find me at Instagram. It's at Shunter _. But yeah, I would love to hear any questions or yeah, just any questions or comments y'all have.
First off, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. One, love the presentation itself, like the design of the slides, they were awesome. And then the content of the presentation was really great too. I've started like my first kind of corporate job, and I understand where you're coming from, where it takes so much approval process, even going through legal to get a social media post made. So I resonate with that. I know that we have like a lot of students here like working on their first internship or kind of like looking to get that first corporate experience. I was wondering if you can kind of touch on that, like when you first started at your first corporate job, what would be one of the pieces of advice that you would kind of give to yourself back then?
Yeah. So first I'll say this is a template I found online and that's a business life hack. If you're ever like, there's so many beautiful templates and they elevate it and people think that you made them and they're like, oh, this presentation is so impressive. Always find a Google Slides template. It's going to change the game for you. I remember because that very first internship that I had that turned into I became a part-time copywriter and social media manager for them at Push Button Productions. I stayed there for like 3 years. I did roles also at other organizations. They were great. They knew that I had to diversify my resume and my portfolio, and it would help them as well because I'd be a stronger writer when I came back. But I was there for 3 years. So I got to have a lot of conversations about my growth and how I had changed and when I came in. I do remember because when you're starting with that first internship, um, you're not going to be relying like when I went to my Disney interview, I was like, here's the things that I did at American Airlines, another Fortune 100 organization. So you know that I can trust me. You can trust me with your social media. Like I'm not going to go haywire and know how to write for the scale of an organization. But when I was going for that first internship at a much smaller operation, those soft skills are truly everything. Um, Research, it is not, I know that everyone's like perpetually afraid of being like the creeper in this person viewed your profile on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid, dive in, figure out if they went to UCF as 90% of professionals in Orlando did, figure that out. Figure out also like I think something that's helped me well in the soft skills department is I've learned to match the energy of my interviewer really well. I interviewed completely differently with my soon to be hiring manager at Disney than I did with at KPMG because it was a completely different organization. The people I interviewed with were like 30 and 26 at Disney. And they had been working in social and comms for a while. And then at KPMG, my manager is like a guy in his 50s that's an industry veteran that doesn't know so much about social media, but he cares a lot about traditional advertising and he cares a lot about KPI, less so about the creative ideas I have about social. So matching the energy of your interviewer really well and figuring out specifically what in that role that you're interviewing for they want to see in someone because they're not looking for crazy proficiency. You're likely 18 to 21 in your first internship. They're looking for someone who's going to be a great quick learner on their team and is going to gel with that team really well. Because you're an intern, you by nature don't have a lot of professional experience. So figuring out how to match the energy of the interviewer, which is something that also comes with practice, do a lot of practice interviews. That's helped me that's helped me a lot.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
We do have another question from Tyler. He was curious on how important are technical skills like the Adobe Creative Cloud, like when working in social media.
Yeah. So it's because there are so many different roles in social media, that looks completely different on any team. There's no team that's going to be like, oh, you need Adobe Creative Cloud. That's fine. Like that's always going to be helpful. What I've found has been most helpful for me in terms of like knowing programs like Adobe Creative Cloud is having a working proficiency. I know in my role at Disney, one of the things that helped me get my full-time role was that I collaborated with the graphic design intern, and they were having a lot of problems with the consistency of the international program's Instagram stories. So I was like, hey, Waylene, who she's still on that team at Disney. But I said, Waylene, let's figure this out. How, if you could design some templates, I know my way around Creative Cloud enough to be able to use this template, and you don't have to design everything because you have enough going on. I can just put in my copy, put in a picture. So having a working proficiency of that just to navigate around it, not necessarily knowing design thinking or being able to do motion tracking in After Effects or something. But having a working proficiency is a really, really good booster, I would say. But to speak to the idea that every team is different, another part of why I got my role on my Disney team was that I had been doing photography for a few years. And one of the big pain points, particularly with the clients that I served, was that getting photography was really expensive. And particularly with, I mean, with Disney, if there's one out of date costume, they don't like to use that photo anymore, right? Because everything should be up to date. So I presented to them like, hey, if you'll let me, I'll go on board or I'll go in the park and I'll get this photo for just the cost of my labor. So that unique skill set that I brought to the table was a lot of why I was turned from an intern into a full-time associate. But in terms of individual hard skills, the only things I would say, figure out at least one social media management platform. They're all pretty much the same. And every team uses something different. There's no industry standard. So learn, like, Hootsuite's free. So like learn Hootsuite and know your way around Canva, because that's increasingly popular, and know your way around the Adobe Creative Suite. Those are going to help you, but they're by no means necessary.
Gotcha. Thank you again for that.
Yeah.
Also speaking on how a lot of social media teams are different, we had a question from Gabriella on like how big are the social media teams typically at companies like Disney or KPMG?
Yeah. So I have a unique perspective because I've been on particularly small teams within the companies I've been at. But I think the KPMG US team, because there was, like every other company in America, there have been recent layoffs and restructuring. But I mean, their social media team is probably not more than 5 to 10. My apologies if that's way, way off. My recruitment marketing team, which was about half accounts and then half content, social media communications, graphic design. We had 30 people across the country, which is huge for a recruitment marketing team, but not big for a team at Disney necessarily. So I was one of probably like 8 to 10 people that actively worked on creating social media editorial calendars on my team at Disney. Granted, I was in a very specific certain team at Disney. But at the same time, I mean, even with large organizations, you probably won't see like 50 people all working on social like that. If you truly need that kind of volume, we're probably going to an agency that needs 50 people to work on social.
Gotcha. We also got another question from Maria asking, how was your internship at EVOC?
Yeah. It was, so I was the copywriting intern. I was the first creative intern Evoke had in like 5 years. So it was a really unique experience. I loved my manager. His name was Brian. He's at Publix now. He's great. Oh, he's incredible. It is a little bit of a hike. It is a hike, and I think it's still unpaid. It's in Lake Mary, if you're not familiar with the agency. But also and not many people are willing to make that hike. So there's a lot of great opportunity to be had. If you're willing to hike up to Lake Mary, you can get some great experience. And I worked on Pita Pit. I worked on Doggy Pot, which is like those trash bags that are at like dog parks for dog poop. I worked on the Florida Department of Health HIV awareness campaign, which was incredibly, it probably one of the best experiences of my professional career. I'm gay myself, and a lot of HIV awareness content is obviously oriented towards specifically male gay relationships, but the LGBT community as a whole. So that was really impactful. You get to work with some like great clients there. But yeah, it's a hike. I understand that. I get that. I remember making that drive and paying that Sun Pass bill to go up to Lake Mary.
Awesome. So we do have a few more questions on the chat for you.
For sure.
This one you kind of touched on a little, but Carolina asked what other technical apps besides Adobe are needed.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of touched on that. I love that you mentioned Canva because we do have some workshops
Yeah.
coming for Canva for whoever's interested in learning that. So that's exciting. Another question from Jordan was, what do you use to study or practice copywriting, or did you learn on the job?
Yeah, so I definitely learned on the job. I definitely dove in there and I definitely learned on the job. Um, Writing spec work is going to be so helpful, and anything particularly with the creative side. I mean, there are some no-nos, like I would not hand in copy that's in like webdings, and if you don't use Comic Sans, right? But it is all very subjective, and there are things that I turned in that certain clients would love, and then if I wrote it for another client, people would hate it. But there are a lot of great student programs, um, and like student spec work programs where you can just keep writing fake content and you can use it in your portfolio. Um, just keep doing it. That's been the biggest thing that's helped me grow. There's a website, I think it's called Write Ads with, no, it's called Make Ads with Me, I think. But basically it's like a matchmaker for if you're a copywriter and you're like, I want to do spec work and I need a graphic designer or an art director, they'll like match you with people in your area that have opposite skill sets of you. Um, so I'm sure there's other people in the Orlando area, certainly in Florida. I mean, Florida is such a huge place for ad. You have Miami Ad School down south, you have Ringling, like it's such a huge place for ad, especially Ringling has such great graphic design talent coming out of it, that you'll be able to find people. I also I like to read a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find that I'm at my creative best when I keep that up. Certainly during the pandemic, I mean, I stopped commuting, right? So I wasn't listening to as many podcasts, but I feel that I'm at my creative best when I'm continually consuming content, of people I admire that I think is good. But it all works, depends on what works for you. I went to a talk at Yellow Shoes when I was at Disney. They have a thing called like Creative Mornings. And I was listening to one of their lead graphic designers talk, and someone asked him basically the same question. He's like, if I could sit at home and just stare at a tree, I would do that. Like my brain doesn't think about graphic design after 5 o'clock. So that could also work for you. But for me, continuing to do spec work, I got to do indoor recess over the summer while I was furloughed. That was a great experience. But there are a lot of opportunities to create spec work, and that's what's helped me the most.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Sam, we have another question. It's from Lindsay.
Mhm.
She's asking specifically, what is recruitment marketing?
Yeah. Yeah, so I will talk about this all day. If anyone has a specific interest in recruitment marketing, find me on LinkedIn, email me, but I will keep this brief for the sake of not boring everyone else that doesn't have an interest in it. So basically, recruitment marketing is creating the recruitment materials, or sometimes expands into like PR, but creating a favorable environment to convince people to come and work for your company. So I worked with Disney Cruise Line and international programs. So international programs is a good unique example to use. International programs, I usually ask when I'm in interviews, like, are you familiar with the parks? But I have a feeling that everyone here is. That's great. But if you think about Epcot, like the World Showcase, the people that come in from all around the world to work at the World Showcase. So I developed social media content. I worked on print to send to like career fairs and study abroad fairs. But it's all basically instead of selling a product, you're selling the job. It is popular with there are some companies that do it kind of freelance. Like if you just need a one-off, like, hey, we need a recruitment marketing video for our recruitment site. There are some companies that do that. There are a lot of companies and an increasing amount of companies that are having 1 to 5 person recruitment marketing teams. And then if you're a huge organization that we called it mass volume hourly that needs a lot of people, like Disney had at the time what was the biggest recruitment marketing team in the country, which is probably going to be unseated by Amazon, they're hiring like 40 people for their recruitment marketing team right now, because they need to recruit 1 million people. But yeah, I did a lot of work in creating materials to come and convince people that Disney was the best employer to work for, and particularly with Disney Cruise Line, like here's why you want to work for Disney and not Norwegian or Carnival or what have you. But again, if anyone's specifically interested in it, it's a really niche part of the marketing field, but there is an increasing amount of opportunity within it. I would be happy to offline this and talk to you one-on-one.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
We also have another question in the chat. This one's from Easton. They want to know, what kind of work did you do at NBC Universal? Specifically, they're curious about their internship. So if you could just speak on that.
So I was a Golf Channel intern, which was under the NBC Sports umbrella. I was on the programming team. So I did a lot of, we did research into, because I think it's Japan where they're like really getting into golf. And so we did a lot of research into those emerging markets, what kind of stars they like to see, so we could then turn that over to the social media team. A lot of research into like just what programs were performing well, so the programming team that were actually deciding the schedule could figure it out how best to program. If you're not familiar, like TV programming is basically doing the Tetris puzzle of what TV show goes in what spot and when. There's 1.5 million internship opportunities always open at the Golf Channel. One of my best friends, like a year after me, interned at the Golf Channel. They also acquired Golf Now, which is like a golfer like selling tee times at golf courses. So there's a lot of opportunity. If you're looking for your start in NBC, there's a lot of opportunity there. But NBC has internships all around. And they also have, I went to an advertising conference where NBC was a career fair sponsor there. And they have a lot of entry level availability and like ad sales and stuff like that. Peacock, they have a lot of opportunity in Peacock right now, which is their answer to like Netflix and Disney Plus. But yeah, the Golf Channel is a really specific part of that. If you're interested in interning at the Golf Channel, I didn't know I was in town until I did acapella at UCF. I was in voice box, and we sang the national anthem at the Arnold Palmer Invitational one year. And I was like, oh, this is a whole operation we have just in town. They like to see a demonstrated interest in golf, or at least my hiring team did. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity if you're willing to make the commute to Sand Lake theoretically when the office is back open. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's so valuable to like hear that from you.
Yeah.
So we have so many questions. So Michelle is asking for someone who's considering going into marketing, but I'm assuming they're not sure yet. What would be some advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I would say that, so I would say give it, like if you do an internship and you're like, I hate this, but you still think like, I think marketing could be okay, but I just hate this. Find something that's still within marketing, but is the opposite of that, that you think you might like, and try that. Because marketing is so different fundamentally as an experience, depending on where you are. Because of how I was just when I was 19, I had an accounts internship and I was awful at it and I hated it. I'd probably be decent at it now, just because I could talk to people on the phone better now. But I remember sitting like, why am I even doing this? Like, should I like change my major? I just want to graduate. But if give it a shot and try a lot of different things. There are a million different disciplines in marketing. Um, Also figure out like marketing not only in the role that you are in, but in the organization you're in is so different. There's an organization in Orlando called Ad2, which is like the student arm of the American Advertising Federation Orlando Club. Um, that you could get great connections and exposure to what it's like to work in an agency. Working in an agency is so different than anything. It's so different than anything I've done in-house. Like it might be, I've worked in in-house agencies, like they run like an agency, they just are within one company, but the people are different, the attitudes are different. It's wholly different. So try a lot of different things. Yeah, I think that's my biggest advice is just really, if you're thinking about going into marketing, there's a lot of opportunity, so it's easy to dip your foot into it, but give it its fair, give it the old college try and see what you really like about it. And if you like nothing, that's also fine. That's there's lots of other jobs that you can do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Another follow-up question. We have one here from Tyler. They want to know, how often do you learn new skills to help you out in your career?
Yeah. So the nature of social media, like which is a love-hate relationship that I have with social, is that when Facebook says jump, you have to say how high, because Facebook and Instagram, and by Facebook I mean any platform, but they'll change their rules all the time. So I have to learn new things about the platforms and also just new techniques to do the same old work I was doing all the time. Like I remember when I was at Disney, working in recruitment marketing, like there's some, like obviously if you want to be a lifeguard anywhere, like you can be any age and be a lifeguard, but chances are it's going to be young people who have experience with like working at a summer camp. And so Facebook, for terms of employment, was like, you cannot limit by age, to like make sure that like everyone's hands were clean, right? So we had to find really interesting and unique ways to segment our social media advertising to still hit people that were like interested in lifeguarding, which like, I don't know, I don't have like marketing as an interest on my Facebook, but I do it as a job. So we had to find really unique ways to target the people that we wanted, which it's all you have to learn. Just by nature of working in social media, you have to learn new things all the time. Also, if you do agency, you will have to learn about a million new agencies or industries you never knew existed. I did, after I was an intern with Evoke, I was brought on as a freelance copywriter. I wrote a lot of blog content. And so I wrote a lot of content for like some testosterone therapy place in Orlando. I am a cisgender woman. I don't know anything about testosterone. Like I'm not a 30 to 50-year-old man that's starting to think about testosterone replacement. Like I have no idea, but I know so much about that now. So you will also just learn a lot about different niche industries if you are in an agency setting where you're working with a lot of different clientele.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So let's just wrap up with the 2 questions that we have left. So we have Amanda over here asking, do you have any additional advice on how to land an internship at Disney?
That's always the $1 million question, isn't it? I will say, so I was in a unique arm of the company where like I was sitting on the same floor of the casting center with the campus hiring people. And I will also give the massive asterisk that this has changed so much since COVID. Certain internships just are not hiring right now. If you want an intern, like you better like going for Disney streaming services because they're doing great. Like they have a lot of intern talent. Disney Plus and Disney streaming services, which are different entities, as I learned, they're doing great. So those are the internships you're probably going to want to go for. But it is a very unique thing. So they really view more than any other company that I was at, they really view their internship as a talent pipeline. And that talent pipeline does begin with the Disney College program. I am not a DCP alum, but I was the only non-DCP alum of my intern class on my team. And I was one of like 6 people that came in at the same time as me. So that pipeline does start there, and that's different. Again, like people who are working, I was working in like a parks role, and I also like the equivalent, there was an equivalent to me for marketing the Disney College program. So it makes complete sense that that person should be a DCP alum because they had that whole experience. But they also, I kept throwing applications at Disney professional internships when I was like 18. But they view it as a talent pipeline. So they want you to be as experienced as possible. And you're always going to be going up against some last semester senior. But they're thinking about taking you like with the potential of being an employee, right? So I wasn't the strongest candidate until I was close to graduating. So I started my internship in June of 2019, and I graduated in December of 2019. So I was very close to graduation, and that's when it finally worked for me. Additionally, look into like whatever role you want at Disney, whatever internship. And I, at the time, would have said all of them. But really look into which ones you want. When I got my internship, I had gone from never having any Disney interviews to in the same season, I was interviewing for copywriting intern at Yellow Shoes. And I would have been in California. I would have had to move out there for a while, and then the Florida-based team that I ended up being on. And so I got to the last round with Yellow Shoes, and the person that they took has like a full master's degree. And so especially like Yellow Shoes, even for entry level, they're usually taking people with some years of work experience and at a large agency. I was just, by nature of being an undergraduate, and I was 20 at the time, like I was just never going to be the strongest candidate that they got for Yellow Shoes internship. So really look at what like LinkedIn stock, whoever has had the internship you want at Disney, and look at their resume and see what they did and like kind of align and be like, okay, what kind of experience was this hiring manager impressed with? What kind of stuff worked for them? I know like I had friends that had only like local brand experience, and then what really sold me in my interview was my ability to talk to my American Airlines experience at a prior Fortune 100 organization. So yeah, look at people who have had the internships that you're gunning for at Disney and see like what got them there.
Thank you very much for that answer.
Yeah.
And our last question here comes from Rafael. Rafael wants to know, have you always been a great speaker, or have you developed your skills throughout your experiences over the years? And it's a 2-part question. It looks like the second part is, do you think this is the most important part of marketing, developing the skills to be able to communicate with anyone? So I guess the first part, talk about your communication skills, and second part is how important is this to working in terms of working in marketing?
So Raphael, I'll give you a bonus for how much I said I'd pay you to say that I was a good speaker. You're very kind. I did, like when I was in high school, I just by nature of like what I did, I ended up taking like a dual enrollment, like 3 different dual enrollments at 3 different universities, public speaking classes. Like it was just the strangest thing of how I did that like pre-college program. And then I did, I'm from Indiana. So I did one through like Indiana University, just because it's what qualified for my actual high school graduation. I had to do something else at some point. So I did, like I was forced, and I remember when I didn't realize when I signed up for that college program, it was like intro to communications. And I didn't realize until they sent me the textbook before I went down to the college that it was a public speaking class. And I cried for weeks. Like that was my worst fear. Granted, I was like 16, but oh my God, it was my worst fear. I cried for weeks and weeks and weeks. But at that point I had paid the money, so I wasn't getting out of it. So it is something that I've developed. Over my career, for sure, but I did have like a strong foundation coming into college, and that is what helped me have those soft skills in interviews to convince them that I would be a good person to share an office with. But you're always learning. My personal philosophy is I want to be the dumbest, least eloquent person on my team. Like I never want to be a big fish in a small pond because I'll never grow. I remember when I got to my Disney team, my Disney boss, I would die for her. Like I know this is being recorded. She can know. She's incredible. Like she's such an incredible professional. Um, and she just knows how to just say everything like so eloquently. And it took me like a month to stop saying boat instead of ship at Disney Cruise Line. Like she was just so eloquent. And so I thought I was doing great. And then I came to this team and I'd have to present in front of DCL leadership. I'm like, I sound like I feel like I'm barely competent. So put yourself in situations where you have to improve. Put yourself in situations where you're surrounded by people who speak the way that you want to speak and you will rub off. I remember, this is kind of a tangential example, but I could not riff when I came into a cappella, but everyone around me could. So I learned. There's also a great organization called Toastmasters. I think that's what it's called. I think it's called Toastmasters. There's an Orlando chapter, but basically it's like a public speaking practice organization. They have chapters all over the place, but it's just for the purpose of being a better public speaker. I remember my boss at Push Button. His name is Josh Bendayan. He's worked on the National Ad Fed Council. He's been a prior president for the Orlando Ad Fed, but he still does it, and he's an incredible public speaker. I heard people have great success with doing improv comedy at SAC to improve their public speaking skills. But that aside, to answer the second part of the question, it certainly has helped. And I've known people that were not great public speakers and they've done fine, but it is that kind of boost. It's the kind of thing that takes you from intern to like, we should consider this person to be a full-time employee, that they're going to be able to speak eloquently in front of clients or share information well. So it certainly has helped me, but it's very, 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 very practicable.
Gotcha. Love improv, by the way, like that. Glad you mentioned that because it does help a lot with communication. But yeah. Thank you again, Sam, so much for presenting tonight. We really appreciate you coming to speak out. It was a great audience as well, too. Really great questions as well. So thank you all for attending tonight. And yeah, we did put the Google form in the chat as well for you guys to fill out. The color of the day is blue for that attention check question. So be sure to fill that out. Also, if you are interested in becoming a member of the American Marketing Association, I'm just going to share my screen real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Process to join, very simple. For the students here, it is just a $29 student fee where you visit the AMA national website at ama.org. And then we have our own chapter dues, which is just $20 that you can send to us via PayPal. You have the option of joining AMA's Orlando chapter and connecting with their more experienced alumni and members and get access to their resources and benefits, and that's only a $5 additional cost. And then once you once you receive your AMA national receipt and as well as your PayPal receipt, just email both of those at us at amaucf@gmail.com. If you have any questions, I'll be staying on the chat for a bit later. But again, thank you guys so much for tonight's event.
Thank you so much for listening to me for an hour. I saw someone ask what my Instagram handle is, so I'm gonna drop it, but I am team follow back. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Lily, for reaching out. This was so much fun. This was such a great opportunity, but yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. You did an amazing job, and I'm grateful that you gave us this opportunity to hear from you. Your presentation was amazing, just pristine. Like,
great. I'll record that and send it to my boss. Be like, you hear this?
Yep. I'll endorse it.
Great. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you.